Welcome to Music History Monday for July 1st, 2024. I'm Bob Greenberg, and the title for today's podcast is The Sony Walkman, a Triumph and a Tragedy. If you haven't already, please consider joining me on my subscription site at patreon.com/RobertGreenbergMusic, where I blog, vlog, podcast, pontificate, review, and bloviate 4 to 6 times a week. We mark the introduction on July 1st, 1979, 45 years ago today, of the Sony Walkman. The Walkman was the first entirely portable, high-fidelity, or at least fairly high-fidelity, audio cassette player, a revolutionary device that allowed a user to listen to entire albums anywhere, anytime. Introduced initially in Japan, the higher-ups at Sony expected to sell 5,000 units a month for the first 6 months after its release. Instead, they sold 30,000 units in the first month alone, and then sales exploded. All told, Sony has sold over 400 million Walkmen, Walkmans, in cassette, CD, minidisc, and digital file versions. And Sony remained the market leader among portable music players until the introduction of Apple's iPod on October 23, 2001. For Sony, the Walkman was a commercial triumph. For consumers, it was a technological game changer. But for humanity, taken as widely as we please, it can and will be argued that the portable music player, or PMP, has been an unmitigated disaster, a tragedy that has served to increasingly isolate human beings from one another in a manner unique in our history. Headphones and earbuds. Growing up, my maternal grandparents lived in a pre-war apartment building at 82nd and Riverside Drive in Manhattan's Upper West Side. Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, or just Lincoln Center, was located just 16 blocks to the south, a 16.3-acre complex between 66th and 62nd Streets. Lincoln Center's Library and Museum of the Performing Arts opened in 1965, and I remember my grandmother taking me and my brother Steve down to see it. Actually, I don't just remember the visit. It is etched forever in my 11-year-old memory because of what happened there. There was a large open area filled with small circular tables on which were built-in record turntables. As I recall, each of these circular tables had 4 stereo headphones plugged in around the turntable. One would go up to a counter, request a particular record, and then sit down and listen to it through the headphones. I had never listened to music through over-the-ear headphones, stereo or otherwise, before that visit, and I still remember the amazement I felt. I'd never, ever experienced such sonic fidelity. I'd never imagined that recorded music could sound so fantastic. And because I was listening through over-the-ear headphones, most of the ambient noise in the room was blocked out, effectively isolating me and allowing me to focus strictly on the music. I don't remember what my grandmother did to drag me away from that turntable, whether she used a leather sap, a fire hose, the jaws of life, or more likely, the promise of ice cream on the way back to her apartment. Whatever, because of those stereo headphones, I had experienced musical high fidelity for the first time in my life, and I was hooked. To this day, I have a number of excellent over-the-ear headphones, and when I really must listen for recorded detail, I will listen through one of them. For your information, I will not use earbuds, as I can't tolerate the sensation of something shoved into my ear canal, which is too bad for me. To the point, the immersive experience provided by headphones, by broadcasting directly into our ears while isolating us from ambient sound, is seductive. But at what point might the isolating aspects of the headphone/earbud experience become a less than positive thing? The advent of PMPs, be they Walkmen, iPods, or smartphones, has allowed two generations of listeners to isolate themselves from the world around them, often to the point of near total disengagement. I am honor-bound to point out that transistor radios, which were introduced commercially in 1954, were the first portable music players, the first PMPs. Soon enough, they came with El Cheapo plastic earphones that plugged into the radio and fit into one ear. However, they sounded terrible, and because they fit into just one ear, they didn't isolate the user from the world around them. We'll pick back up on the isolating aspect of the Walkman and subsequent portable music players in a bit. But first, let's honor the Walkman and its inventors. Sony introduces the Walkman. The credit for thinking up the Walkman goes to Sony co-founder Masaru Ibuka, 1908 to 1997. Ibuka wanted to be able to listen to opera on the long flights his position required of him, but he found that even the smallest battery-operated cassette players available at the time was simply too big to travel with. So in March of 1979, Ibuka suggested that a small monaural cassette recorder Sony made for journalists called a Pressman be converted into a playback-only stereo unit that employed earphones in place of a speaker for listening to music. It was a great idea. The project was handed to Kozo Osoni, general manager of the Sony tape recorder business division. Within just a few months, Osoni and his people had created a small, playback-only, high-fidelity stereo cassette-based product with plug-in, lightweight headphones. On July 1st, 1979, it was launched in Japan under the name of Walkman, a takeoff on the earlier device called a Pressman. Despite the fact that the 71-year-old Masaru Ibuka had conceptualized and commissioned the creation of the Walkman, it was Akio Morita, 1921 to 1999, the other co-founder of Sony, who decided to market it primarily to young people. According to Morita, quote, "This is the product that will satisfy those young people who want to listen to music all day. They'll take it everywhere with them, and they won't care about record functions. If we put a playback-only headphone stereo like this on the market, it'll be a hit," unquote. Bingo, dude. Bingo. Sony's marketing campaign emphasized youth, energy, and style. It also created what is now referred to as the headset culture, making it cool and fashionable to accessorize wearing super lightweight headphones. In February 1980, Sony began to sell their battery-powered Walkman worldwide. They marketed it under a variety of names. In the United States, it was first sold as a Soundabout, In the United Kingdom, it was marketed as the Stowaway, and in Australia as the Freestyle. Akio Morita had originally preferred the name Walking Stereo, but the name Walkman stuck, not just in Japan, but universally. It has since gone on to become the name for an entire line of personal music players, not just cassette players, which were discontinued in 2010, but DAT, that is digital audio tape devices, mini disc, and CD players as well. The CD player was originally marketed as a Discman, but its name was soon changed to Walkman CD. As mentioned at the top of this post, by the end of 2023, Sony had sold over 400 million Walkman devices of all kinds. Sony's various Walkman devices prepared us for Apple iPods, which prepared us for our smartphones, which, depending upon your point of view, are either the greatest single techno gift given humanity since the flush toilet, thank you, Thomas Crapper, 1836 to 1910, or a giant step towards the social destruction of our species. Headphones/earbuds and isolation. For now, I'm choosing not to discuss the content, particularly social media, that is so often consumed on our smartphones. Rather, for now, let's just focus on the Walkman-inspired physical insularity our smartphones' earbuds provide. It's a degree of insularity, of isolation from the physical world around the user that would have been unthinkable before the invention of the Walkman in 1979. Yet one of the articles I read in researching this post referred to this insular, turtle-like ability to carry our world around with us as privatized mobility. It's a phrase I intend in the future to pass off as my own. There is a large and growing literature dealing with the social and spiritual damage that began with the Walkman/headphone revolution in 1979. For example, in their article entitled The Portable Music Player as a Defense Mechanism, 2010, Joseph Burns, Ph.D., and Paul Sawyer, Ph.D., argue that the devices are routinely employed to actually avoid the perceived discomfort of genuine social interaction. Writing in his book, The Perfect Thing, How the iPod Shuffles Commerce, Culture, and Coolness, 2007, Stephen Levy describes the PMP as having created for its user, quote, a portable alternative reality, unquote. Levy goes on to describe that it was the Sony Walkman that first allowed its users to create, quote, a reality soundtrack for themselves, presumably bettering their lives while separating themselves from society, unquote. In his frighteningly prescient book, No Sense of Place, The Impact of Electronic Media on Social Behavior, 1985, Oxford, Joshua Meyrowitz argues that, quote, the media may go as far as to create new social situations that have nothing to do with who is around us, but rather are shaped by what we experience on media. Reality may actually be superseded. This goes to language and how we carry ourselves. Many of the social lines that society once kept are now blurred because people are gathering their information through the media rather than through real life experiences, unquote. Please, this was written a full 31 years before the 2016 election and the death of truth and birth of alternative fact that election in many ways represented. One might argue that the problem is television, not PMPs and smartphones. But I believe the isolation created by PMPs and smartphones is a necessary precondition to the intellectual isolation that allows otherwise sane people to believe that Hillary and Bill Clinton and various Democrat cohorts were running a child sex trafficking ring out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., or that Jewish space lasers are responsible for the wildfires in California. The isolating technology of PMPs and smartphones, which allows us to experience non-stop indoctrination at any time and in any place, is, to my mind, even more dangerous than watching television at home, because of the combined issues of isolation and choice. Regarding choice, Joseph Burns and Paul Sawyer write, quote, "What sets the Walkman user apart from the television viewer is that the Walkman user has infinite control over what he or she is presented with. A television viewer has a limited number of choices, even if given cable or satellite television, whereas a Walkman, or now iPod or iPhone user, has a literally unlimited number of choices with which to begin changing or reshaping their opinion of the world around them." Unquote. With all of this in mind, it is with mixed feelings that we celebrate the introduction, 45 years ago, of the Sony Walkman. Perhaps the infinitely clever people at Sony, who aside from the Walkman have given us the first all-transistor television set in 1959, the first home videotape recorder in 1965, the first CD player in 1981, the first consumer camcorder in 1983, the PlayStation in 1995, and the first DVD player available in the United States, 1997, well, perhaps they can figure a way out of this technological dependence they've helped to create. You think? Personally, I'm not holding my breath. Thank you. To sample and download one or all of my many courses on subjects musical produced by the Great Courses / The Teaching Company, please visit my website at robertgreenbergmusic.com.